One thing you can definitely say about the Russo-Ukrainian war is that it definitely is interesting. There aren't that many examples post World War II of having a fully conventional war. The only real examples I can think of is the Korean War, some of the Arab Israeli wars, and the Iran Iraq war. Most of the rest of them have been some form of asymmetric warfare, and we haven't seen like maneuver warfare by entire army divisions, like traditional trench warfare and artillery, and two powers that both have at least somewhat functional air forces. If nothing else, it's kind of interesting to see how modern tanks actually perform when they're going up against other tanks and how well the anti tank weapons actually work. Because if you think about it, for the entirety of the Cold War, everyone was prepared for this giant conventional war to break out in Europe, and it never happened. And sure, we've seen Soviet equipment in a lot of third world countries, but we've never really seen it used in kind of the way it was meant to be used in the form of large mechanized divisions. The other interesting thing about the war is the progress of it itself. It's very much a stop and start affair where it looks like one side's on top, then it looks like the other side's on top, but then things seem to not be happening, then things seem to be happening. It's definitely one of the worst cases of the fog of war and just bad information coming out of it that I can think of in recent memory. If you listen to Western or Ukrainian sources, Ukraine has gone past Volgograd and is well on its way into Siberia. And if you hear Russian sources, Kiev surrendered the other day and Ukraine is being reincorporated as a republic. Both sides have completely different views of reality, and it's almost impossible to actually know what's going on. That being said, a couple weeks back, it looked like Russia was finally starting to have some success. It looked like Ukraine was running out of artillery shells and other weapons, that there was a lot of disruption and issues that were created by the US and all these other NATO powers just throwing random weapon systems at them that they had to train people on. I always thought it was very shady to be sending like, okay, here's five of this mobile rocket system that requires specific training and specific ammunition. Here's 10 of this artillery system. It just seemed like a massive logistical headache to me that might very well do more harm than good. But there was that issue. Russia seemed to be gradually advancing on multiple fronts. I think there was word that there was going to be a big offensive in the south. And then all of a sudden, things kind of flipped again. Now, over the last week or so, Ukraine has launched, from what my understanding, a large scale counterattack in a variety of different places. I've seen a number of different maps, but most of them tend to agree that they regained a tiny bit of ground in the Donbass, but they more or less completely expelled Russia from the Kharkov Oblast. If I remember a couple weeks back, the Russian government was talking about how they were going to have a referendum in the Kharkov Oblast for it to rejoin the Russian Federation. And they were like, we're going to have referendums in the two Donbass republics. We're going to have them in Kherson. We're going to have them in, I forget what the oblasts are down here. We're going to formally annex all the territory we've occupied, and we're going to launch another big offensive, and we're going to bring the Ukraine down. And now, while Russia's certainly not out of the fight, they have lost a substantial amount of territory in a short period of time. Now, what does this actually mean? Is this another, ironically enough, pun intended, Battle of Kursk, where Ukraine's managed to pull all of its resources together into one kind of big, desperate attack, and because they're kind of recklessly using everything they have, they're able to temporarily overwhelm the Russians locally and retake some territory? Or is this a sign that Russian morale's collapsing, their logistical system isn't working, they're running out of fighting men, and their invasion's kind of just getting bogged down and that they've lost strategic initiative? It's very hard to tell, and I've heard arguments from both sides. One side that Russia's just kind of gotten completely humiliated. They got completely blown out. They've lost all of this territory, and the situation is just going to continue to get worse. The other one is obviously that Russia is falling back in a tactical retreat in order to shorten up its lines and prepare for a counteroffensive. Regardless of whether that's the case or not, I don't like using this word, but that kind of sounds a bit like cope to me. Russia's performance this war has been very kind of hit or miss. And I still have no idea what they're doing. I can't tell if they have no idea what they're doing and they're just making decisions like on a week to week, day to day, hour to hour basis, and there is no overall strategy or war goal, or if they have a very like complicated, in-depth plan that they've been going towards, and everything's going according to plan, and in a couple months they're going to achieve all of their goals. The EU's going to come crawling back to them, and we're going to be talking about how Putin is like the greatest Russian leader since Alexander the Third. And so the argument for this being a 4D chess plan is that, okay, so the assumption would be here that the Ukraine is running out of soldiers, that they're running out of equipment, that this is kind of their last gasp. This is their attempt at the YOLO offensive that Russia didn't launch. And if they fail to break Russia or come to some sort of negotiated peace, they will lose all ability to launch further counterattacks, and initiative will just be with Russia for the rest of the war. Russia also launched a number of strikes that took out large amounts of its infrastructure. So there is a chance that Russia is doing kind of what Germany was trying to do in the latter half of World War II, where they were trying to win through economic warfare. Now, the original goal when Hitler invaded the Soviet Union was to take the Caucasus and take command of the Volga, denying the Soviet Union access to oil so their economy would collapse. Likewise, occupying Ukraine denied the Soviet Union access to the majority of its food supply. And it was hoped that even after they failed to take the Caucasus, Plan B was to hold on to the Ukraine until Russia starved to death and they were no longer able to function properly. So maybe Russia is doing something similar in this case, because they don't have to deal with the same sort of bombings and missile strikes and other things on their economy. And because they're not, maybe that's part of why they're not mobilizing their population to try to keep the economy as normal as possible and going on for as long as possible, and just kind of sitting out the clock, because the Ukraine can't do this forever. Their economy's completely imploded. Their infrastructure, in particular, recently just got completely destroyed. And there's always the danger that these Western countries are going to lose interest. There's also the incoming winter situation, in which, because Russia cut off natural gas and oil to Europe, they're seeing hyperinflation there, and it's going to be an extremely cold and difficult winter for a lot of people there, which may make them reduce their support or even pull out of the conflict altogether and stop supplying the Ukraine. But once again, Putin might just not have any overall strategy, and their goal is kind of like what Israel was trying to do at the end of the Six-Day War, where they were just trying to grab as much territory and destroy as many Arab units as possible, so that when they came to the negotiating table, they would be in the best possible position. But we really have no idea. It does kind of seem like Russia had territorial ambitions, as they were going to hold all those referendums in the various occupied territories. So that hinted that maybe the goal was to take everything east of the Dnieper. Because initially I thought their goal might just be to take Donbass and install a puppet regime to control the rest of the country. But they might have broader territorial goals at the moment. The issue is no one really knows what's going on. That's what kind of makes it interesting, but it's also kind of what makes it frustrating. The sheer amount of propaganda that's flying out of all sides makes the thing basically impossible to follow. And so, like I said, I think those are the two ways you can look at this. That this is some sort of grand strategy that's going to pay off. And I can certainly see how Putin would come to that decision and how it might work out. At the same time, though, I can very much see the inverse. So I guess we're going to see sooner or later, one way or another, how this is going to play out. But I just kind of figured I'd put in my 2 cents. I find the whole thing interesting, and I kind of like covering it as it shifts from phase to phase.